Good day, mates. It's Wednesday, April the 29th, and today we're going to be looking at slides 13 through 17. Now, before we start on our slides, let's go and look at our assignments because I have added another assignment for this week. So let's take a look and see what we got. This is the week of April 27th through May the 1st. Your first assignment was due on Monday. That was your media, video, PowerPoint, slides 1 and 2. There were 5 questions you had to answer from that video. That was due Monday the 27th. You have a second assignment due this week. Is a Chapter 7 media quiz. It will be on slides 4 through 25. That assignment is due Friday, May the 1st. So Chapter 7 media quiz, slides 4 through 25. There are 10 fill-in-the-blank questions and 10 true-false questions on that quiz. So make sure you're looking at the slides, the PowerPoint slides. It will follow the order of the PowerPoint. So, and look at the true-false, and remember, if anything in the true-false, any part of it is false, it makes the entire statement false. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at them. Okay? So, all of these assignments can be found on your student portal under Files. Don't forget, I hope that by now you've got in your Chapter 5 PowerPoint test, your Supreme Court handout and questions, your bureaucracy handout and answered questions, your Chapter 4 PowerPoint, and all the President's Men video quiz. So you've got 5 previous assignments plus 2 assignments this week, so you should have a total of 7 assignments turned in by May the 1st. All right, so let's go to our PowerPoint, and we're going to start at slide 13 today. Today we're going to be looking at the founding era in relation to the media. Now, the print press certainly played an important role in the founding of the American Republic. The trial of John Peter Zenger is an example of one of the most famous American trials illustrating the importance of freedom of the press as a way to hold government officials accountable. Here's what the trial was about. In 1735, the editor and publisher of a newspaper called the New York Weekly Journal was tried on charges of sedition and libel for publishing articles that criticized William Cosby, the governor of New York Colony. In other words, the editor and publisher of the New York Weekly Journal was writing things that weren't flattering to the governor. He didn't like what was being said. Now, it didn't matter that the things that were being said were true. The governor just simply didn't like the negative things that were being said about him. So this is the trial. The trial was an important event because it presented a challenge to the government's power to limit freedom of expression in order to maintain what the government considered good public order. So it's a challenge to the government's power to limit freedom of expression. Okay, because the freedom of the press was the ability, as long as you weren't saying something that was libel or seditious or slander or that was untrue, freedom of the press meant you could print as long as what you were printing was true, regardless of whether it was fair, regardless of whether it was flattering or non-flattering. Free press meant you could print it as long as it was true. Now, so the trial was an event that presents a challenge to the government's power to limit freedom of expression in order to maintain what the government considered good public order. In other words, they didn't want the press stirring the people up. That's what the key was. This is what the governor was concerned about, that it was going to get the people stirred up, that the people were going to come out against him, that it made him look bad, and that he could be replaced as governor. So he wanted to maintain good public order. So he's challenging this freedom of the press to say negative things about a political official. Now, the outcome of the case strengthened the colonists' commitment to 2 ideas. One was the idea that freedom of the press and trial by jury were important checks on the power of government. In other words, you need a free press in order to have a democracy. In order to have a strong democracy, you need freedom of the press. You need for the press to be able to investigate the government, report on government officials to make sure they're doing the right thing and that government is treating people fairly, that the government is doing the right things, and that public officials are not cheating or taking from the people. And then you've got the trial by jury. That's an important concept. If you're accused of a crime, English law, Old English law, said you had the right to be tried by a jury of your peers. So these are two ideas that the colonists were committed to, and this strengthened their case. Freedom of the press, trial by jury. Now, the language of the First Amendment acknowledges the importance of freedom of the press. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press. Now, this goes back to this trial with John Peter Zenger, because initially he was found guilty, he was thrown in jail, but he got a good lawyer, and they argued their case, and they won their case, that he had the right to publish things about the governor as long as they were true, and he had the right to have a trial by jury to let his peers decide whether or not he had violated the law or he had said anything that was libel or slander against the governor. So out of this trial comes an important concept for the writers of the Constitution, acknowledging the importance of freedom of the press in a democracy. And so they wrote in the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press. Abridging the freedom of the press means to hinder it or restrict the freedom of the press. So Congress cannot make a law that will restrict freedom of the press. That's the language of the First Amendment. The First Amendment establishes the unique role of the press as the only business that is specifically protected by the Constitution. No other business is protected by the Constitution, but the press is. Now, this special status is one reason why the press is sometimes called the Fourth Estate. This is a reference to the fact that the press is, along with Congress, the President, and the judiciary, one of our political institutions. Now, we don't think of the press as being a political institution, but in a sense it is, because it is a checks and balance on all three branches of government, because they have the freedom to report, to investigate the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch. They act as a fourth political institution to check the other three branches. And the other three branches can also check the press. They can make sure, the judicial can make sure that what they're saying is true. They can make sure what they're saying are not lies or slanderous in any way. The legislature can utilize the press to get information out, to inform people, to educate people, but they can also make sure that the press, once again, is not saying things that are untrue or libelous. And the president has the power also, if he feels that something that's said about him is untrue and slanderous, then he has the right to sue also, to hold them in check. But it's very difficult to prove if something written, if they wrote it with the knowledge that they knew that it wasn't true. Sometimes they may write things and it finds out that those things weren't true, but it has to be the intent that you knew it was not true and you wrote it anyway and you printed it anyway. And that's usually very, very hard to prove. Now, just as Americans love to hate government, they love to hate the press too. We see it in our society today. You know, people say they don't trust the press, they don't like the press. You've maybe seen on television some of the president's rallies where they would scream at CNN or MSNBC or reporters that were there and call them names and things like that. There's always been that love-hate relationship with Americans, with their government and with the press. So what we see today is not necessarily something that is new in relation to the press and if they're fair and if people love them or they don't like them. Now, that hate relationship in the partisan press. Freedom of the press played an important role in the founding of the Republic. But criticism of the press is almost as old as the Republic. The early press focused on scandals and salacious stories in order to sell papers. Then as now, scandals sold papers. Remember, the primary function of the press is to do what? Or news organizations. It's to make money. And what sells? Scandals sell. And if all the press printed was all the good stuff and all the right things, and they never printed anything negative or scandalous, their sales probably would not be as high as they are. But people, that's just the nature of people. They love to read about scandal. And so the early press focused on scandals and salacious stories. The press today does the same thing. If something pops up and someone's got a mistress somewhere and the press finds out, or somebody misspent money, or whatever it may be, or misappropriated money, whatever it may be, if it's a scandal, you can almost bet that the press is going to report on it, because that's what generates news. In our media today, we would say that's what generates clicks on your computer. You follow the headlines. Well, that's what you would see in the news media. You see these big headlines on newspapers. People would pick it up. They want to read about it. Or you see the same thing today. You would see, if you're watching any of the major news networks, they've got the scroll at the bottom there, breaking news on there. It makes people want to tune in. They want to find out more. Brings in more viewers. More viewers brings in more advertising. More advertising makes more money for the company. So, scandals and salacious stories, they sell. They sell whether it's on newsprint or whether it's the media or whether it's online. It sells. The early press was sometimes called the penny press because the papers were very cheap. You get it for a penny. The penny press was political rather than professional. The penny press wasn't interested in how they looked as far as standards and morals. They were political and they were very partisan, and their partisanship leaned one way or the other. In the early days of the Republic, the press was both very political and very partisan in there. They had a definite lean in their politics and who they leaned towards or which party they leaned towards. Now, a paper was identified with a particular point of view. It openly and explicitly and strongly either supported or opposed a political party. It took strong stands on political issues, candidates, or government officials. So in the early days of the newspaper, they were very partisan, very open, very explicit about who they supported or who they opposed or what party they supported or what party they opposed. They took very strong stands on political issues in the paper. If there were editorials, they took a strong stand towards a candidate or towards government officials. So, papers identified with particular points of view. There was less news reporting, and there was more of what we today would call editorial or analysis. And you see that a lot today. You see a lot of editorials. You've got an editorial section in a newspaper. But if you actually watch the news, if you watch Fox or MSNBC or you watch CNN, a lot of what they report is not, some of it is news because they break and they say, well, this is what happened. It's factual. But mixed in with the facts is a lot of opinion on what they think, on their perception of whatever the event that is going on. So you've got today a fusion of opinion along with facts, and that's where you find it difficult to separate the fact from the opinion in a lot of the news that is broadcast today. Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Tucker Carlson, Rachel Maddow. All of these individuals, they give editorials. They report the news, of what's breaking or what's important for the day, and then they give an analysis of it. They give it an analysis and they give their opinion on what they think. So that's where you have to separate out opinion from actual fact. So neither the reading public in those days nor public officials expected a newspaper to strive for objectivity or neutrality. So the people in the past weren't really looking for neutrality, that the paper's not going to take sides one way or the other, or they're going to be very objective and they're only going to present the facts. They didn't expect that. They didn't particularly care if a newspaper leaned one way or the other or came out in support of one or the other. They expected it to happen that way. They didn't strive for objectivity. They didn't strive for neutrality, or to use the phrase popularized by Fox News today, fair and balanced reporting. They weren't looking for fair and balanced reporting. They were looking for newspapers that were definitely telling people what their opinions were and strongly stating their support or opposition to either political parties or political candidates or to government officials in general there. So they didn't look for fair and balanced reporting. They looked for partisan and political reporting. So we will stop there at slide 17 today, and then we will pick up with slide 18 tomorrow. Hope y'all have a great day. Don't forget, you've got that new assignment. It'll be quiz. There are 20 questions on it, 10 true false, 10 fill in the blanks, and it's on slides 4 through 25. So make sure you're following along on the slides so that you can get the answers to the questions there. Y'all have a great day, and I'll speak with you on Thursday.